Melanie is a respected and enthusiastic land use and conservation advocate. She's a consultant to conservation-focused nonprofit organizations throughout California, and she's directly or indirectly permanently protected 60,000 acres in Orange County and more than 350,000 acres statewide. And she most recently was instrumental in stopping the Brea Canyon Road project. We're very honored to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to mute everyone since we're recording. Perfect. So thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. As you heard, Melanie Schlotterbeck, I'm a consultant for the nonprofit Hills for Everyone, regional nonprofit. And this presentation is actually going to focus on conserving lands in the Puente-Chino Hills Wildlife Corridor through 30 by 30. So I have 4 topics that I'm going to cover tonight. The first one is the organization itself, then the state park's creation, biodiversity in our region, and then the 30 by 30 campaign. So first, a little history about Hills for Everyone. In the mid-1970s, with the threat of an international airport actively being planned in the Chino Hills, area residents organized and a new group was formed called Hills for Everyone to establish a state park instead. And you can tell I've been at it a long time because I'm in the red jumper on the right. And so I'm not that young anymore. And of course, my twin sister to my left, and then my mom in the bottom photo, and my brother with the buzz cut and the blue top. It takes someone to stand up and say, I love this land and I want to save it, and then actually take steps to make that happen. These yard signs were seen on a trip to England. There was a sign on every house, big and small, in a little town outside of London. And we know nothing about Whitfield Marsh, but we know that they were standing up for something to protect that land. Here's the man who stood up and fought for Yosemite, John Muir. And in the case of Chino Hills State Park, it was a man named Dave Myers. And he was a young man who grew up in La Habra, hiking and knowing the hills. And one day he ran into one too many bulldozers tearing up one too many ridge lines, and he decided something needed to be done. He also knew that 4 counties came together here in the hills: Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Orange, and Riverside. Early volunteers initially looked at trying to create 4 regional parks, but they decided that was actually too complicated to coordinate. So from advice from the Bureau of Land Management staff, they actually settled on trying to create a state park. Step 1 was looking up the purpose of a state park in the state's code. So the purpose of a state park shall be to preserve outstanding natural, scenic, and cultural values, indigenous aquatic and terrestrial fauna and flora. Fauna being animals, flora being plants. That sounded like what they were after. And the Public Resource Code also delineates that preservation of the resources is the highest value for a state park, and only those uses that further understanding or enjoyment of those resources are to be allowed. So they set about doing their homework to build a case, and agencies like the Department of Parks and Recreation need justification for spending money. For example, establishing a new park. And Dave took that task on. He learned state parks were trying to save representative slices of California's landscapes. It turns out that this kind of landscape was not well represented in our state park system. The state has protected a lot of redwood forests and beaches, but not much grassland, chaparral, or oak or walnut woodland. This was also on the heels of the oil embargo of the mid-1970s, and the state wanted to provide more accessible parks. So volunteers from the fledgling organization began documenting the natural resources in the hills. With the threat of housing developments and this possible international airport, they were able to get local cities to help convince the state legislature to ask the Parks Department to do a feasibility study. This study would determine whether or not this land was worthy of state park protection. And you know the answer to that. Dave provided much of the research for the study himself. Dave got involved in planning issues surrounding the park, and he developed literature, newsletters, and held press conferences for this new organization, Hills for Everyone. He gave over 200 slideshows to scout groups, service clubs, planning commissions, city councils, homeowners associations, anyone that would listen. And that's how my mom, and ultimately I, got involved. She was asked to represent her homeowners association at a Hills for Everyone meeting. And by the end of the meeting, she'd actually offered her phone number as a contact for the press. She was a stay-at-home mom with 2 young daughters, me and my twin sister, and was really easy to reach by phone, but she knew nothing. There was a lot to learn. So let me highlight a few of the key volunteers for Hills for Everyone. The woman standing in the back is Pat Bilodeau, and she was a supporter who made the best ever snacks that always enticed the press to come to our events. The cowgirl in the yellow jacket is Brea Councilwoman Norma Hicks, a longtime and avid supporter of the state park. Behind her in the red hat is Martha McLean, a parks commissioner from the county of Riverside. And if you know the park, you know of McLean Overlook. It was named after her. The man on the right is Assemblyman Ross Johnson, and he guided the efforts to get the park purchased for over 20 years as both an assemblyman and senator. As a Republican, he worked across party lines to get funding for this park. This is a picture of Ross's longtime aide, Susie Swat, and she brought her husband and grandkids down a few summers ago to see what she had helped accomplish. Susie and my mom in the pink used to spend hours in Johnson's office hand coloring maps for hearings. You can get the sense of commitment and pride that still brings her down here, even though she's retired. And in these presentations, we often like to point out how the park helped itself. This is the parks director that we first worked with, Russ Cahill, and he supported our efforts. As he was coming to visit the land, a red-tailed hawk flew overhead with a snake dangling in its mouth, and he was sold. He'd never seen anything like it in the wild, much less in an area so close to so many people. And everyone joked about how well-timed the hawk release was, but of course we had nothing to do with it. The park did it. So moving on to Chino Hills State Park and how it was formed. Well, the easy answer is one acquisition at a time. Dave Myers designed Chino Hills State Park. He also designed it in a new way, a natural way, along ridgeline boundaries so that the visitor was protected from the sights and sounds of urban life, and the streams were self-contained and could remain unpolluted. The red lines indicate the ridge lines identified for protection. Beginning in November of 1981, the Department of Parks and Recreation actively began acquiring properties from willing sellers within the ridge lines. Over the next 25 years, there would be a total of 33 separate acquisitions that would weave together the now 14,107 acre state park. Landowners with smaller acreages would sell their property all at once, while landowners with larger acreages sold their land in phases as money became available. You can see the original vision for the state park in red, overlaid on the existing park ownership in green. Additional lands are still needed to complete the original vision of the protected ridgelines. And Hills for Everyone continues to work on these strategic acquisitions. As recently as 2021, other conservation partners have also been acquiring land to build on the existing system of preserved lands nearby. And I can tell you that this property, outlined in red, is next on the lineup for conservation on our list. A signed purchase and sale agreement is in place, and I anticipate that the project will be funded sometime in November and hopefully close escrow by the end of the year. This next section outlines biodiversity that we have here in both Southern California and in the Puente-Chino Hills Wildlife Corridor. We live in a remarkable region, and even though we like to think of ourselves as cutting edge and innovative in California, the fact is we live in an ancient landscape. It's old and it's rich. It's old because no glaciers scraped their way across the terrain here, leaving Southern California and the bedrock lifeless upon their retreat. The plants and animals here have had a long time to evolve. That gift of time gave them the chance to differentiate into an astonishing array of species. This Tecate cypress tree is a remnant population that hangs on south of the 91 freeway, and these trees once covered all of the Southwest US. Throw in a warm Mediterranean climate and you have both a crucible and an Eden for unusual and rare life forms. The gift of geologic uncertainty in the form of earthquakes provided the flora and fauna with many opportunities for mobility. This calliope of movement and change created hills, mountains, and slopes that allow plants and animals to move around, establishing new niches, creating a lot of endemic species. And endemic species are species found nowhere else. These are some of the reasons why Iowa has no endemic species and California has over 2,100. There is no other place in the lower 48 states that has 11,000-foot high mountains within 50 miles of the ocean. This coastal influence, combined with the influence of the mountains, have added even more opportunities for differentiation. Even the east-west alignment of our hills is uncommon. Most mountain ranges on the globe run north-south, while ours run east-west. We also live atop rocks that are 9 million years old, and some that were compressed into new form with the last earthquake. Biologists tell us that there is no other region of comparable size in the nation that has greater biodiversity than we have right here in Southern California. This region is considered a global hotspot of biodiversity, a place rich in species threatened by development. Our area lies smack dab in the middle of this remarkable landscape, and local lore maintains that untold treasures actually lie buried in the foothills and mountains, but in reality, the treasures lie above ground. In the streams, in the grasslands, and in the oak forests and walnut woodlands where rare and wonderful wildlife still abide nearby. So this last section is the meaty section of my presentation, but you have the context now for the work that we're doing here in Southern California. And this section, the 30 by 30 effort, actually ties together all of our work and focuses on acquisition in the wildlife corridor. So 30 by 30 was an initiative established by Governor Newsom to protect 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030. So let me tell you about Hills for Everyone's work on this front. Based on how lands are classified as protected, they need to be durably protected or permanently protected. And it appears as of this year, we've already protected 24% of the lands and 16% of the coastal waters. So we need 16% and 14% more respectively. Hills for Everyone first partnered with the regional nonprofit Friends of Harbors, Beaches and Parks on 30 by 30 to understand what might be available to protect. And this organization has what's called a green vision map, which documents the protected lands in and around Orange County, as well as the lands that need to be protected. And since Hills for Everyone had received grant funding to focus on 30 by 30, we used their map to show the state what was and wasn't available in our neck of the woods. So in partnership with FHBP, I reviewed the Green Vision map and organized the county into sections. The coastal section, urban, Puente-Chino Hills, Santa Ana River, and the foothills. And this resulted in 18 subset maps that provided a detailed review of the lands, comparing the geography to aerial images from Google. And I was able to eliminate properties from the map that no longer met the Green Vision map guidelines. And now the Green Vision map is updated to the parcel level as of summer 2021. This map is a portion of the Puente-Chino Hills designated the central section, and 14 properties here have been identified as potential conservation sites. The property legend has each parcel identified by assessor parcel and acreage. So all in all, we know that there are 275 properties identified for conservation, totaling over 30,000 acres in and around Orange County. That means locally, we're ready to receive and spend conservation dollars related to the 30 by 30 campaign. So clearly there's more work to do. And if anyone ever tells you there's nothing left to buy in built out Southern California, you use this statistic. So FHBP drafted comments on the potential acquisition sites. And because coalition building is one of their expertise areas, they built another coalition. And there were more than 30 organizations that signed on to this coalition letter, which was sent the summer of 2021 after the map was done to the California Natural Resources Agency. And we basically advocated for potential conservation transactions on this map using the Hills for Everyone research. In December, the Natural Resource Agency released a Pathways to 30 by 30 document, which outlines strategies on how the state could achieve its lofty goals. And there are a number of strategies and actions included that will help us achieve success individually and collectively. However, I'm going to note that unless 30 by 30 is actually funded, this is just a pipe dream and won't ever turn into reality. Thankfully, with a plush budget, Governor Newsom used portions of the state surplus to invest considerable funds in conservation, but more is needed to hit 30 by 30. Estimates are we need $1 billion a year for 10 years. There are 3 priorities for 30 by 30 implementation. The first one is protecting biodiversity, and this means the plants and animals in the ecosystems across our landscape. So the deserts, mountains, valleys, wetlands, coastal plains, foothills, and more. We need to protect the plants and animals. The second priority is providing equitable access to disadvantaged and socially vulnerable communities. This means that communities of color and tribes, those that are in park poor regions, those that are harmed by or burdened by pollutants, need improved access to nature. This can come in many forms: pocket parks, access to trailheads, job training, and mentoring programs. The third priority is climate resilience, and California and the world are already facing challenges from climate change. So we must build resilient landscapes through wetland restoration that can absorb sea level rise, to improve natural areas through restoration, to provide defense against wildfire ignitions, urban greening, where trees are planted in neighborhoods to reduce the urban heat islands and provide shade during extreme heat days. In response to the Pathways document, FHBP drafted another round of comments through its coalition, and FHBP asked organizations again to sign on and support comments and recommendations. Another partner that has formed over the last few years is the Power and Nature Coalition, and it's a grassroots coalition that unites organizations working to implement 30 by 30. Power and Nature spans all of California and pulls together some of the best and brightest minds in conservation, equity, and climate issues. So regional coalitions were formed based on the 9 regions outlined in the Pathways to 30 by 30 document. And through my work with Hills for Everyone, I happen to be the facilitator of the Southland Coalition, which manages over 100 organizations, of which Friends of Whittier Hills is a part. We meet monthly. Orange County is part of the Southland region, which also includes Ventura, Los Angeles, and the western portions of Riverside and San Bernardino counties. All of the facilitators of the 9 regions meet every other week at a steering committee meeting. And sometimes, as you see in this slide, we have a special guest speaker. In this instance, it was the Wildlife Conservation Board. Within the steering committee, we also have topical areas like equity, the marine environment, etc. And I also serve on the communications committee as well. At the local level, our goal is to bring conservation dollars to the region and make sure that our legislative leaders know that we have conservation projects that need funding. After forming, the Southland did a call for projects: conservation, equity, and climate. And there were 3 criteria that needed to be met in order to be included on the list. First, the project needs to fit into the 30 by 30 framework. It needs to be within the Southland region. And last but not least, it needs to be sponsored by a nonprofit or community group or tribe. So let's talk about the types of projects. We have conservation projects. Those can be simple and straightforward, like acquisition or restoration projects, but they can also be more complicated projects like advanced mitigation or conservation easements. In terms of equity, sample projects here, these could be providing access to wildland areas or experience fighting wildfires, on-the-job training for restoration work, or even field work and scientific research. Climate projects, this answer actually depends on where you're located. So this can be tree planting to absorb more carbon dioxide, reduce erosion, and stabilize soils. Or maybe it's a wetland creation project that reduces the impacts of sea level rise and storm surges in coastal areas. Projects can also be non-native plant removals and native plant installation to reduce fire spread, increase pollinator habitat, and create training opportunities for disadvantaged youth. All of the submitted projects in the Southland were then mapped across the region, and so we know now where the suite of projects are located. But we needed to set some priorities because that's a lot. So setting regional priorities meant we established 3 subcommittees in the Southland to review the projects against the 3 different priority areas: biodiversity, equity and access, and climate resilience. And then we selected various tools that are publicly available that we could use to objectively evaluate submissions. We wanted something that was defensible in our prioritization. And the subcommittees then nominated projects to be put through this evaluation process. So specific metrics were included based on feedback from the committee members, and I included a link in this spreadsheet so that we would be able to use this tool again in the future. So this is the biodiversity prioritization page, and you can see all of the evaluation metrics in the screenshot came from the ACES database, which is the Areas of Conservation Emphasis. So each nominated project was then scored using that tool. So for biodiversity, we looked at things like connectivity rank, ecoregion biodiversity, the number of endemic species, if it was in a conservation plan, etc. The highest ranking or lowest, depending on the criteria, in each column would earn a single point. And then all of the ones were added up by project or row to get a final score. In this example, we had 8 of 13 projects make the final cut, and these projects would become the 2022 endorsed Southland priorities. So 2 projects that Hills for Everyone supported were evaluated and made the top tier. These were the eastern ridgelines of the state park, called First National Investment Properties. That's the red area I showed you before. And then of course, the missing middle of the wildlife corridor owned by Era Energy, which ties together the western 4,000 acres with the eastern 15,000 acres. As a part of the priority list, each of the top ranked projects was offered a press event, co-hosted by Power in Nature Coalition. And while our acquisition wasn't actually at the top of the list, the 2 projects above ours were not ready for a press event. And so we held this event last night, my goodness, it's been a busy week. It was last month. And this is just a short video we put together. So I'm going to play that for you now.
We are here today to demonstrate the power of goals and partnerships. Governor Newsom set a goal to protect 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030. It's called 30 by 30. There are 3 priorities: protecting biodiversity, building climate resilience, and ensuring access to nature. This park meets all 3 priorities. Hills for Everyone and many other nonprofits, tribes, and community groups are working together to help achieve 30 by 30 from the ground up through the Power in Nature Coalition. So it is with 30 by 30 in mind that we kick off Southern California efforts to make the dream a reality in a state park close to millions of residents.
Preserving areas like this within our communities is important so future generations can enjoy the open space and we don't pave everything over. And that's really got to be our goal, is integrating our needs to accommodate growth, but at the same time ensuring that the beautiful natural amenities that California has to offer, we'll still offer them in the future to future generations.
We would not be here if not for the lead and vision of State Senator Josh Newman and his amazing staff. We would not have asked for a better partner to help pass legislation to grow and protect Chino Hills State Park. And finally, a big thank you to Governor Gavin Newsom for signing Senate Bill 266 into law.
Chino Hills does provide 14,000 plus acres that contribute to conserved lands for 30 by 30. And that offers incredible habitat to a variety of different species. A healthy ecosystem is healthy for our communities and healthy for our people, and provides all the needs that we need to not only survive, but to thrive.
This wildlife corridor, of course, as Madeline mentioned, is a very important resource for hundreds of species, plant and animal species. And these are the types of projects we love to see happen and to highlight across the state. So thanks so much for having me here and for WCB to be part of this effort. We'll be excited to continue the protection of this Puente-Chino Hills corridor into the future. and to help maintain that biodiversity for both the plants and animals and the folks that want to use this area for recreation.
We all recognize how important the hills are to our community and the region. Beyond it being an example of bipartisan, multi-jurisdictional, sustained cooperation, it is more important than that. It is a place we call home here in Chino Hills, a place we want to visit, as we see on a daily basis, a place we want to bring people, especially when it's green and showing off our stunning wildflowers.
We exist only to help nonprofits, agencies, organizations, communities realize their vision for what they want to achieve for conservation. Here at Chino Hills State Park, we've worked with Hills for Everyone, we've worked with the Mountains and Recreation Conservation Authority to protect. The first phase was 300 acres, which is not too far away from here, and we are very actively working on the second phase of that acquisition, which is 842 acres that we hope to have under contract very, very soon.
So we also mapped, because I'm a geographer and I like maps, all of the prioritized projects on our Southland map. And now we know where those are, and we submitted those to the state through the coalition for endorsement up to the California Natural Resources Agency. And I'm pleased to report we've already had some successes in the Southland. The first one is Deer Creek Beach, which was one of our priority projects. It's 1,250 acres next to Point Mugu State Park in Ventura County. It's got 1.25 miles of beach frontage, and it was purchased by the Trust for Public Land for $25 million. It will end up being transferred to the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. And the second acquisition that's happened is the preservation of Banning Ranch at the mouth of the Santa Ana River in Orange County. This property is 387 acres, former oil field land, and was assembled using state, federal, and private funds. The land is now named after the donors, Frank and Joanne Randall, called the Randall Preserve, since they donated $50 million of the $97 million acquisition price. So this is great, but how do we fund these projects? So let's talk about numbers. Last summer, there was an extraordinary amount of money available to implement 30 by 30, more money than's ever been available before in state history. So for example, 30 by 30 acquisition and restoration projects had 1.5 billion. 30 by 30 planning, capacity, and science had 71 million. Climate smart lands had 749 million. Wildlife corridors had 118 million. Drought and water resilience came in at 763 million. Fire management and ecosystem resilience had 377 million. Equitable access and parks had 672 million. And last, community resilience and extreme heat funding was at 577 million. All of this totals an investment, or a down payment, as I like to call it, in 30 by 30 of $4.85 billion. That's a huge number. So this is the same information, just organized by agency. So you can see that the majority of the funds went to the Wildlife Conservation Board and the State Coastal Conservancy. So I want to look specifically at state conservancies, which is the blue next to the Coastal Conservancy. So in our geography, there are 5 local conservancies that cover the Southland in whole or in part. And outside the Southland, 125 million was allocated to conservancies. Around 116 million was allocated to Southland conservancies, and that's pretty impressive. What's unfortunate is that not all Southland geographies are covered by a conservancy. So this was an unprecedented time for conservation. And then with the lower tax receipts, the governor slashed much of the budget. So it went down by $1.5 billion for conservation, climate and coastal resilience, and nature-based solutions. And unfortunately, conservation investments disproportionately lost more money than any other budget category. Right now, we're heading into the month of May, and that means legislatively, they are mandated to provide the May revise of the budget. And as of yesterday, the Senate released a Protect Our Progress budget, which outlined proposed reinstatements or new funding for conservation. And this was to the tune of $909 million back to conservation. The budget in all has to be adopted by June. So in the next 8 weeks, we'll have a lot more information. So how do you tap into some of this money? Well, back to Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, they're offering workshops to train people how to complete conservation transactions, use conservation strategies identified in the Pathways to 30 by 30 document, or how to complete an analysis or due diligence for a transaction. And this is something Hills for Everyone is promoting to help get projects organized and off the ground, not only for the Southland Coalition, but for our projects. And the first workshop was earlier today. They're scheduled for the 4th Thursday of the month through November from 10 to 11:30, and they're held by Zoom. Also, the Natural Resources Agency opted to begin coordination with local groups and nonprofits in an attempt to organize the state. This includes nonprofits, community groups, and tribes, all of which are invested in 30 by 30. And there are 3 slots for existing entities like the Biodiversity Council, the Ocean Protection Council, and the Natural Resources Agency. But the rest of the membership, 15 other spots, includes a diverse geographic focus, background, and expertise, including tribal inclusion and more. And I was actually appointed to this committee last August. So what's next in this entire process? Well, California is just one state participating in 30 by 30. The Biden administration has also said that that the entire nation is participating, and that's through the America the Beautiful campaign. And this is also an international effort across the planet. So right now it's 30 by 30. Next, it's going to be 40 by 40, and then it will be 50 by 50. Biologist E.O. Wilson determined that we need to protect 50% of the planet to ensure its survival and therefore our survival. So to wrap up this presentation, Hills for Everyone, our work is setting the stage for what we individually and collectively want to protect in the Southland for 30 by 30, while at the same time aligning our work with the Puente-Chino Hills Wildlife Corridor. And at this point, I'm going to ask you, if you want to take out your cell phone and subscribe to Hills for Everyone monthly e-newsletter, you can use this QR code. So you hold your phone up with the photo app open, and your phone should recognize that it's a clickable link, which you can then click on, add your information, and you'll be added to the Hills for Everyone e-newsletter. So at this point, I am available for questions, and I'll stop my screen share so that you can see me.